Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a topic that honestly affects every single one of us in our cultural communication. And hey, this isn't just about, what not to say when you're traveling. It's actually a much deeper journey. It's about understanding ourselves and figuring out our place in this incredibly complex, connected world. So let's just jump right in with a huge question, one that seems so simple but is actually profound. Who are you? The answer to that starts with something that's all around us, kind of like the air we breathe. It shapes us in ways we don't even notice. It all starts with culture. You know what I love about this definition is that one word, negotiation. It tells us that culture isn't some rigid rule book we're handed. It's a living, breathing system. We learn it from our family, from school, from the media, and it shapes everything we believe and do. And it's from this cultural backdrop that our own identities really start to take shape. All right, to really get this, let's start by looking in the mirror. See, our identity isn't just one single thing. It's actually made up of these three interacting layers. Okay, so first up, you've got your personal identities. This is all the stuff that makes you uniquely you, like being a huge fan of hip-hop, or maybe you're really shy. Then there's social identities. These come from the groups we choose to be a part of, like a sports team or a volunteer group. And finally, we have cultural identities. These are the broader categories, like your nationality or your gender, and they often come with some deep history and social meaning. All three of these layers mix together to make you, you. Okay, now this is where things get super interesting. Some of our identities are what we call avowed. These are the ones we pick for ourselves, the ones we claim. But other identities are ascribed. Those are the labels that other people put on us. Sometimes they match up perfectly, right? But a lot of the time, they don't. And that gap, that tension between who we know we are and who the world tells us we are, that's a huge part of what makes intercultural communication so tricky. All right, so we've looked in the mirror. Now it's time to look out the window and try to understand how all these identities actually work out there in the real world and why difference is such a big deal. To get this, we need to talk about a big idea. Social constructionism. I know, it sounds super academic, but stick with me. The idea is actually pretty straightforward. It basically says that a lot of the identity categories we see as natural, like race, for instance, aren't really biological facts. They're actually ideas that societies created and gave meaning to over a long period of time. And look, if you're a little skeptical about that, check out this absolutely mind-blowing fact from the Human Genome Project. Every single one of us shares 99.9% of our DNA with every other human on Earth. Just let that sink in for a second. So, if we're all practically identical on a biological level, what does that really mean? Well, it tells us that race, as we think about it, wasn't created by nature. It's an idea that we, as societies, came up with. And historically, that idea has often been used to build hierarchies, to give power to some people and take it away from others. And you want to see a perfect example of how these ideas change? Just look at this timeline from the US Census. It's wild to see how the official definition of race has been all over the map. But listen, this isn't just some American history lesson. It's a case study. Think about right here in Taiwan. How have the ways we talk about identity changed over time? The ongoing conversations about indigeneity, or how families trace their origins. It's proof that these categories are never, ever set in stone. Okay, so we've got a better handle on ourselves, and we've looked at how the world works. So now, the million-dollar question: how do we actually build that bridge and communicate effectively across all these differences? This is the heart of what we're talking about today. And to really get good at it, we need to upgrade our thinking, We need a tool that lets us move past simple black and white answers. And that tool is called a dialectical approach. So what the heck is a dialectic? The easiest way to think about it is like you're holding two totally opposite ideas in your hands at the same time, and you don't have to pick one. It's about getting comfortable with the tension, with the both and instead of either or. Let's make this real. Take the cultural individual dialectic. This reminds us that any person you meet is shaped by their culture, absolutely, but they're also just themselves, a unique individual. Or look at the differences similarities one. It's so important to see that we are all incredibly different, but we also share so much. This kind of thinking works for how we see time, too. The static, dynamic dialectic helps us understand that culture can feel really old and traditional, right? But it's also changing, like right now, as we speak. And the history present one, that's huge. It reminds us that everything happening today is connected to what came before. And finally, this helps us think about power. The privileges disadvantages dialectic is a big one. It helps us see that based on our different identities, we all walk around with a mix of unearned advantages and disadvantages. It's complicated for sure, but seeing it is the only way we can understand the full picture.
Okay, for our last section, let's bring it all home. How do we take all this theory and turn it into something practical? It's time to build your own communication toolkit.
So, what are we aiming for here? The goal is to build up what's called Intercultural Communication Competence, or ICC. And there are two really important words here: effective and appropriate. Effective means people understand you. Appropriate means you're being respectful while you do it. You gotta have both. So, how do you do it? It's really a three-step process that you just keep doing. First, it starts with your attitude. You gotta stay curious, be open to learning, and just be okay with not always having the answer. Second, you build your knowledge. That means learning about your own culture and others. And finally, you develop your skills. This is about actively practicing stuff like listening, I mean really listening, and empathy. And this quote right here just sums it all up perfectly. ICC isn't about memorizing 1,000 do's and don'ts for every culture. That's impossible. It's about having a flexible box of tools that you can pull from no matter who you're talking to. So we're going to leave you with this really powerful question from the scholar Brenda Allen. She asked us to think, when were you last thinking under the influence? When was the last time you just accepted a stereotype or judged someone based on one little piece of who they are? Being honest with ourselves about those moments, well, that's the first and maybe the most important tool in the entire box. That's how we start building better bridges.